The town was still under the oppressive weight of a summer sun, the heat making the wooden streets shimmer like a mirage. Dust rose from every step, swirling around the ankles of the few townsfolk who dared linger outside. The girl moved quickly along the narrow lane, her bare feet scraping against the rough planks of the boardwalk. Her dark hair clung to her damp forehead, sweat mingling with tears she fought to hide. She had been sent by her stepmother to carry water from the well at the edge of town, a bucket balanced precariously in her hands. The summer air smelled of parched wood, horse sweat, and the faint tang of smoke from distant chimneys. The townsfolk, mostly silent, kept their distance. Everyone knew better than to cross the stepmother. Her wrath was a story whispered with fear behind closed doors. But today, something had changed. The stepmother's eyes found her like burning coals, sharp and merciless. Her hands, adorned with a few rings that glinted in the sun, clenched and unclenched as her lips curled into a cruel smirk. Without warning, she strode down the boardwalk, heels striking the wood like hammers, and seized the girl by her long dark hair. The girl stumbled, the bucket tipping and spilling water that hissed against the wooden planks in scattered steam. Her screams pierced the air, sharp and desperate, but no one moved. The stepmother's grip was iron, pulling her forward with a merciless force. "You think you're better than me?" the stepmother hissed, dragging her toward the center of town where people had begun to gather. "You dare to look clean, dare to hold your head high?" The crowd formed a loose circle, murmuring in fear and curiosity. Men shifted uneasily, children peeked from behind their parents, and a few older women clutched shawls to their chests. No one dared intervene. They had seen what the stepmother could do, and they knew the cost of defiance. The stepmother's hand whipped over to a small pile of kindling she had set aside earlier, striking a match with a flick of her fingers. The flame danced hungrily in the dry summer air, small but menacing. The girl's heart raced, her eyes widened with terror. She struggled, but every movement seemed only to anger her tormentor. "Don't make me repeat myself," the stepmother shrieked. "Hold still." And then she shoved the girl's face toward the flame. Pain erupted instantly. Smoke stung her eyes, the heat singed the edges of her hair, and a sharp sting raced across her cheek. She cried out, twisting and flailing, but the stepmother's grip was unyielding. Her nails dug into the girl's shoulders as if trying to anchor her in place, ensuring every moment of terror was drawn out. "Stop," someone whispered from the crowd, a man stepping slightly forward before glancing around nervously. "Enough, she's only a girl." The stepmother turned her gaze on him, eyes blazing. "Stay out of this, or you'll regret it," she snapped, and he sank back into the shadows, fear overtaking any courage he might have felt. The girl's skin blistered, tears mingling with sweat as she gasped and coughed from the smoke. The humiliation was as sharp as the pain itself. She felt every eye in the town burning into her, silent witnesses to her suffering. The stepmother laughed, a sound as cruel as it was hollow, feeding off the girl's terror. "Look at you," she spat. "Ugly, weak, worthless." Her voice carried over the hot, still air, echoing against the walls of the nearby buildings. The girl's knees buckled, but the stepmother's hand tightened, dragging her upright. The crowd's murmurs grew, a mix of fear, fascination, and shame. And then a distant sound broke the rhythm of cruelty. The pounding of hooves on dry wood, the hiss of dust kicked up in motion. A horse emerged at the end of the street, moving toward them with purpose. Dust rose in golden clouds around its hooves, shimmering in the summer sunlight. The cowboy appeared slowly, deliberately, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face, his eyes piercing through the haze. His posture was calm, unyielding, but there was a quiet command in the way he moved. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He simply stepped between the stepmother and the girl, boots sinking slightly into the dust. "You're done," he said softly but with authority. "She's coming with me." The stepmother's hands trembled, a mix of rage and disbelief. She had never been challenged in public before, and the audacity of this stranger froze her for a heartbeat. The townsfolk murmured again, some in awe, others in disbelief. "You! Who are you?" the stepmother hissed, her voice trembling with fury. The cowboy didn't answer. He simply held out a hand to the girl, who hesitated, fear still etched deep into her bones. But the touch was steady, reassuring, and finally, after a moment that felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to be guided forward. The stepmother lunged, but the cowboy's presence was a shield. He stood firm, eyes locked on her, unyielding. The stepmother recoiled, her anger giving way to fear, and with one last glare, she turned and stalked away, leaving the girl trembling but alive. The girl's legs felt weak as the cowboy helped her onto the horse. She clutched the reins, holding on more for support than for direction. The townsfolk parted silently, their eyes wide, whispers filling the heat-drenched air. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, fragile and bright, in a world that had known only cruelty. The ride out of town was slow, dust curling around them like smoke from a dying fire. The girl leaned against the cowboy, the tension in her body slowly easing under the steady rhythm of his horse. Every mile carried her further from the horror she had endured, yet the memory of the stepmother's hands, the flame, the crowd's eyes, lingered like a shadow across her mind. But with each step, with each turn of the horse's hooves against the hard-packed earth, there was also a growing sense of safety, of protection. And in the quiet glance the cowboy spared her, she sensed something else, something she had not dared to hope for in years: kindness. And maybe, just maybe, a chance at something more. The golden afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the open plains, painting the tall grasses in hues of amber and honey. Dust rose in lazy swirls from the horse's hooves, but here, away from the crowded streets and cruel eyes of the town, the girl finally felt the first whispers of relief. Her face was still raw, streaked with soot and bruises. Small burns traced across her cheek, and her hands bore the marks of the stepmother's iron grip. She touched her skin carefully, wincing as each movement reminded her of the fire, of the pain, of the humiliation. The cowboy dismounted first, his boots crunching softly in the dry grass. He moved with the ease of someone who had spent years navigating the unforgiving wild, but his touch now was gentle. "Sit down," he said, quietly, gesturing to the shade of a lone cottonwood tree. Its leaves rustled in the faint breeze, offering a cool sanctuary from the relentless summer sun. She hesitated, fear still clinging to her like a second skin. Her body was tight, ready to flee at the slightest hint of threat. But there was something in the calm steadiness of his voice, in the way he looked at her, not with judgment, not with pity, but with patience, that allowed her to sink to the earth, legs trembling, the dust clinging to her damp skin. From his saddlebag, he drew out a clean cloth and a small canteen of water. The girl watched, cautious, as he dipped the cloth into the cool liquid and began to gently dab at the worst of her burns. The touch was firm but careful, precise, and she felt a shiver of relief that was almost disbelief. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "No one's going to hurt you now." Her throat tightened, words caught between fear and the overwhelming tide of emotion threatening to spill from her. She had lived under cruelty so constant it had become normal, a part of her skin, her bones. To hear reassurance, to feel safety, was almost unbearable. I don't know how to," she stammered, voice trembling. He gave her a small, encouraging smile. "You don't have to know yet. Just let yourself breathe." The sun hung high, casting long, dappled patterns of light through the cottonwood leaves. Time seemed to stretch, slow and languid, giving her the space to let the terror of the past few hours begin to uncoil. She could feel the soreness in her muscles, the sting of burns, and yet, under the rough but careful ministrations of the cowboy, she began to relax, just a fraction, just enough. Hours passed as they set up a small campsite beside a clear, slow-moving stream. The girl helped where she could, her movements tentative at first. She carried small bundles of firewood, fetched water, and prepared the cloth and bandages under his guidance. The tasks, simple though they were, gave her a sense of purpose that had been absent for years, and she began to trust herself again. As evening fell, the air cooled, carrying the soft scent of wildflowers and sun-baked earth. The cowboy built a small fire, not large enough to draw attention, just enough for warmth and light. The flames flickered against their faces, casting dancing shadows. The girl watched him in silence as he worked, his hands steady, competent, and careful. There was a quiet dignity in the way he moved, a subtle strength that spoke of someone who had faced hardships yet never lost his sense of honor. Finally, he turned to her, a blanket draped over his arm. "Sit," he instructed gently. "Rest." She lowered herself onto the blanket, hesitant, feeling the warmth of the fire at her back. His presence was constant, steady, a shield she could lean against, if only for a moment. She dared a glance at him, and he met her eyes with a calm intensity that made her pulse quicken. It was not the heated desire of youthful romance she had read about in stories. It was steadier, deeper, grounded in trust and safety. "You're safe here," he said again, his voice low and steady. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Her lips trembled. I've never had anyone who—" She swallowed hard, the words stuck like stones in her throat. He gave a small nod, understanding. "I know, but that's why I'm here. You don't have to face it alone anymore." The first stars began to prick the night sky, twinkling faintly against the deepening blue. They reflected in her eyes as she slowly allowed herself to lean into the blanket, to let the tension of the day unravel just a little. He moved closer, just enough that the warmth of his presence brushed against her shoulder, and she didn't pull away. Over the next few days, the rhythm of their journey established itself. The cowboy taught her to ride, to guide the horse along narrow trails, to handle the rope and care for their small camp. Each skill he imparted was not just practical, it was a quiet lesson in self-reliance, a way to rebuild the parts of herself the stepmother had tried to crush. They ate together, sharing simple meals of bread and dried meat, their conversation easy, but cautious at first. He asked her about her life, about the small joys she remembered before cruelty became her constant companion. She spoke in fragments, hesitant but growing bolder with each word, discovering that she could express herself without fear of judgment. At night, when the fire had burned low and the stars were bright above them, they would sit together, side by side. Occasionally their hands brushed, small and accidental at first. Each touch was electric, sending warmth through her chest, a stark contrast to the cold fear that had dominated her life for so long. One evening, she dared to speak more fully of her past. She didn't need a reason, she whispered, eyes cast downward. She just wanted to hurt me. In front of everyone. And no one stopped her. The cowboy listened without interruption. When she finished, he placed a hand over hers, steadying, grounding. "They did nothing because they were afraid. But you survived. That makes you stronger than anyone who tried to break you." Tears gathered unbidden, and she let them fall, feeling a strange release in her vulnerability. For the first time in years, she was allowed to feel, not ashamed, not hiding behind forced composure. She could simply be, and he accepted her without question. The nights grew warmer, the air thick, with the scent of grass and distant wildflowers. She found herself glancing at him more often, noticing the fine lines of his face, the way his eyes softened when he spoke to her, the strength in his hands as they worked together. He was her protector, her guide, and something deeper stirred, a tender curiosity, a longing she hadn't thought possible after years of abuse and fear. One night, as the moon cast silver light across the rippling surface of a nearby stream, he leaned closer to adjust the blanket around her shoulders. Their faces were inches apart, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them, the quiet rustle of leaves and the soft murmur of the water. "You're brave," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Braver than you know." Her heart thumped loudly, a mix of embarrassment and exhilaration. I don't feel brave," she admitted softly. "You will," he said, and his hand brushed her cheek, careful, gentle, lingering in a way that made her stomach twist pleasantly. "You're stronger than the world gave you credit for." In that moment, beneath the stars and the warm summer night, something fragile and delicate took root between them. A bond built not just on survival, but on trust, kindness, and the slow bloom of something tender, an intimacy born from shared pain and shared protection. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just fear and cruelty, a future where someone cared enough to shield her, to see her as more than her scars, a future where love could exist, even in the wake of so much darkness. And in the quiet of the night, with the fire low and the stars blinking overhead, she felt it, the first fragile stirrings of hope, of trust, of love. The sun rose over the horizon like a relentless spotlight, burning the summer sky with gold and fire. The plains stretched endlessly, shimmering under the heat, while the distant town lay hidden beyond a ridge, unaware of what was about to unfold. The girl sat astride the horse, her posture tense, but her gaze steady, the marks of past cruelty still visible, but no longer defining her. She had learned, in the days since her rescue, that strength came not only from survival, but from standing for herself, from refusing to cower. Beside her, the cowboy guided the horse with one hand, his other resting lightly on the girl's back in a quiet gesture of reassurance. There had been no words overnight, no promises whispered into the night, only the unspoken bond forged from shared trials. Yet in his steady presence, she felt the courage she had once thought impossible. And then the threat arrived. A cloud of dust rose on the far horizon. Horses approached, moving fast, their riders' shapes dark and menacing against the blinding sunlight. Among them, the stepmother herself, riding with a small group of townsfolk emboldened by her fury or perhaps drawn by curiosity and greed. Her eyes locked on the girl, blazing with the same cruel fire that had haunted her for years. But now, there was something different in the girl's eyes, a spark of defiance. "You cannot run from me forever," the stepmother shouted, voice sharp enough to cut through the wind. "You'll pay for this humiliation." The girl swallowed hard, hand gripping the reins, but she did not flinch. The cowboy's eyes met hers, a silent assurance passing between them. Together, they faced the approaching danger. As the group closed the distance, the tension became unbearable. Horses snorted, hooves striking the dry earth, dust curling into the air in blinding clouds. The cowboy nudged their mount forward slightly, positioning himself between the girl and the aggressors. His calm authority radiated in waves, commanding attention without a single raised voice. "Step aside," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of steel. "She is under my protection." The stepmother's lips twisted in rage, but a flicker of hesitation crossed her face. She had never faced someone so unyielding, and the townsfolk who followed her began to falter, their resolve cracking under the cowboy's unwavering gaze. The first confrontation was verbal. Words became weapons sharper than knives. "You have no right," the stepmother screamed. "She is mine to control, mine to punish." "Control is not love," the cowboy said steadily, voice low but resonant. "And punishment does not make you powerful. It makes you small." The girl felt a surge of courage, a flame igniting in her chest. She met her stepmother's glare head-on. "I am not yours," she said, voice trembling but firm. "I never was, and I never will be. Your cruelty ends here." The words hung in the air like a challenge. The stepmother's face twisted, fury contorting her features, but the girl no longer trembled. Years of fear had forged her into someone who could stand, who could fight, not with violence necessarily, but with the unwavering force of truth and dignity. The cowboy stepped closer, hand hovering near his holster, but there was no need for weapons. Authority, courage, and presence were more than enough. The stepmother's followers began to waver, whispers of doubt threading through their ranks. The girl's voice rang clear, stronger than she had imagined possible, and the weight of her words shook the stepmother's carefully maintained aura of terror. Then came the first act of physical assertion. The stepmother lunged, as though to seize the girl once more, but the cowboy moved faster, intercepting her with a calm but unyielding force. The two faced off in the open plain, heat rising from the ground, dust swirling around them. The girl, finally feeling safe, held her ground beside him, hands steady, shoulders squared. "You're finished," the cowboy said, voice low, carrying both warning and promise. "Leave her. Now." The stepmother froze. The world seemed to hold its breath. The townsfolk, witnessing this confrontation, began to murmur among themselves, the tide of fear turning into awe. They had never seen the girl stand so tall, so unafraid, and the cowardice of her stepmother became obvious to all. With one last glare, the stepmother turned her horse, retreating in furious defeat. Her followers melted back into the shadows, leaving the girl and the cowboy standing alone in the blazing sun, dust curling around their boots, the plains stretching infinitely before them. The girl's legs felt weak as relief washed over her, but the presence of the cowboy steadied her. He offered his hand, a simple gesture, and she took it, gripping it firmly. The summer wind carried the scent of wildflowers and freedom, and for the first time in years, she smiled, a smile born not of innocence, but of triumph, resilience, and newfound courage. As the afternoon faded toward evening, the two rode together across the plains, the horizon glowing with gold and amber. The girl's hand brushed lightly against the cowboy's, accidental at first, but lingering just long enough to speak volumes. He met her gaze, a slow smile spreading across his rugged face, and without a word, they understood what had begun between them. A bond deeper than fear, a trust forged in fire and the fragile stirrings of love. They found a quiet riverbank to rest, the water reflecting the brilliant sky above. She lowered herself from a horse, feeling the cool grass beneath her feet, and he moved beside her, close enough for warmth, but not intrusion. Their eyes met, and in that glance, all the unsaid emotions, the fear, the pain, the trust, the hope, passed silently between them. "You saved me," she whispered, voice small but steady. "No," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You saved yourself. I just made sure no one stopped you." Her lips trembled with a mixture of gratitude and something warmer, something deeper that made her chest ache. She leaned slightly into him, and he responded with gentle care, a protective arm around her shoulder. The world, cruel and harsh only days before, now seemed to shrink to just this. The two of them, safe, alive, and together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire and rose, the cowboy lowered his hat, and the girl saw the softening of his eyes in the glow. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally, a silent promise of connection. He leaned down, brushing his lips lightly against her temple. Not a kiss of passion, but one of protection, care, and affirmation. The river reflected their silhouettes, the golden light dancing on the ripples, a scene perfect and timeless. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time, she felt whole, not defined by scars or cruelty, but by resilience, courage, and the warmth of being seen and cared for. They mounted their horses once more, riding side by side along the dusty trail, leading away from the town. Each step carried them further from pain, further from fear, and closer to a life that was theirs to shape. Behind them, the town shrank, the shadows of cruelty fading into memory. Ahead, the horizon stretched endless and golden, summer wind carrying the scent of freedom, hope, and love. And as they rode into the sunset, the girl understood something she had never believed possible. That even in a world filled with cruelty, even after unimaginable pain, there could be redemption, protection, and the kind of love that was gentle, steadfast, and unwavering. The summer plains held them in its warm embrace, dust and sunlight swirling around their moving silhouettes. Side by side, hand in hand, they rode not just as survivor and protector, but as equals, as companions, as something more. For the first time, she was truly free.